how do you feel seeing the film now?
Wonderful. It's so exhilarating, and at the end when he says, if something's difficult, that won't deter me, I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to go away with today.
More closely.
Oh, sorry.
And you have been portrayed by your father any way, or in any of his paintings you never appear. He never wanted to paint you. Or
oh yes,
family?
I sat for him 9 paintings I was in, and then I was also in that film. There's a painting of my mother pregnant with me. And there's also a painting of a baby that's me, so 11 times, even though one time you can't see me because I'm in her tongue. And also drawings and etchings. I did a lot of sitting for my father. That's how I got to know him, really.
It was a way of knowing better?
Yes, because I didn't grow up with my father. And then when I left home when I was 16, and I started to sit for him regularly, and most of the time I sat for him until I had my own child, and it was just too tiring.
And you ever discussed with him about his work, or he ever told you something about his work, how he works and everything, or you was just he was very, I thought seeing the film that is in a way someone that is shy in a way, and but he loved to speak with the people about his work, or he was only, completely, he didn't want to explain anything into what.
I didn't really know how to ask him about his work. My sort of involvement was all literal. I was posing for him. I was watching how he worked, and I watched how he pursued work, and how when he was obviously having a difficult time, how he went through that time, and that was a kind of interesting thing, a lesson. He never we didn't really talk about his work, and once I asked him something about his work, and he said, "You don't really want to know that, do you?" And I kind of didn't. I was experimenting with something, and I immediately felt very self-conscious and inauthentic, so I didn't really do that anymore. And I think once I remember looking at a book of his early things, and his drawings were so sort of incredibly brilliant, and I said, "God, you were so good at drawing," and he said, "I know, that's why I stopped." And I thought that was funny, and everything he talked about was to do. I asked him about the things I was interested in, about Jean Cocteau and Diaghilev, all these people that he'd crossed paths with, and I was fascinated by them. So I was educated in a certain way by him, by asking questions, but he was very unlike a sort of conventional parent in that he decided to teach me something. He really didn't believe in that type of thing, so it was up to me to find things out. And then he was very fascinating. He had a very good memory and would recite huge swathes of poetry like Kipling and very exciting poets, with amazing stories. Or Kipling was a favorite, or there was, and then things like John Betjeman, which were quite funny, and people he'd known. And I just drank everything up and sort of filtered it into my kind of thing.
And when you start doing your own things, did he ever mention something or talk with you about, because Bell is an artist as well, and did you any time had any remarks from him, anything, or saying,
Yeah, I'm a fashion designer, and he was always very kind of thrilled by anything. I mean, I remember when I decided to start working, and he said, "Oh, but I thought you rather liked doing nothing." And then I sort of tempered that. I suppose what it meant was that I wasn't available to sit for him. But then when I did start doing my own work, he was he just liked it. He liked it, and he used to come to my fashion shows when I did them. And even though he hated being photographed, he sort of made all these, literally kind of winced. He would come, and that felt very, very nice. And then he'd do things like, he drew my logo. He had funny handwriting because, well, his explanation was that when he went to a school where you didn't have to go to the lessons, so he didn't go, and so his writing was quite like almost childlike, and it looked really good. So I asked if he would write my name that I could use for my logo, and he did a little drawing. With the dog that his whippet, which I'd given him, and he drew this thing, and it was fantastic. And even like I regularly go through his books and think there must be something I can, I must be able to plunder something, and I can't. And the only thing that works is this dog, which works as a print, it works as a knitted thing. So he did that, and once we wrote a poem together, and he wrote most of it.
Did you say it?
It was called Dress Sense. I might remember some of it. It was half naked, pondering in, what was it? Half naked, pondering in the gloom, knowing that, I can't remember, something. And then it was something about, I should have looked at it before I came. Something about sartorial metamorphosis. Your hat, not what you say is news, and things like that. And it was very good. It was very funny. And we sat down, and he really kind of gave everything. And he didn't have, anything that he didn't consider worth exploring or, giving his attention to if he thought it was valid. So those things were very, very precious,
I want to ask you a two-part question, if I may. So, firstly, I wanted to understand why did you choose this documentary in specific, and if there is something from this viewing that made you understand a little bit more about your father's art or maybe his own personality.
I chose this because, as far as I am aware, it's the only documentary he's actually in. So that's a big plus, and it's short, and I like it the most. I've seen one other documentary, and he's not really in it. So, and watching him in this is very like being with him, and it was, he's very much there, and all his mannerisms, and his shyness, like you pointed out. He was a very kind of, he had, I don't know, I suppose you see it when you watch it, this combination of sort of being agitated with the attention on him, yet very kind of forthcoming as well and excited by it. And then all sorts of things watching it. Like I thought, oh, I'm kind of wearing something a bit like he's wearing today. You know, I like ties, and he always wore these scarves. And I looked quite a lot at how he dressed, because he had very good suits. And then when he was working, he looked a bit like a tramp. And when we'd go out to get a taxi, people wouldn't stop. Back in those, you know, sort of maybe in the 90s, people were expected to be more smart, but they'd speed up the taxi when they saw us like ragamuffins on the street. But I suppose I got a lot of, if you want to do something, you really have to apply yourself, and don't imagine there's any sort of wonderful feeling that makes you able to be accomplished. It's very much to do with working and working and working. And then if you've got something, it will come out like that. Thanks.
Lorenzo. Lorenzo is the son of a great painter as well, Osvaldo Vigas, and
I was amazed by his sight, the way I could almost feel that he was undressing me, looking at me, because he had this very impressive sight that could undress the person he was looking at. That's what I felt. And have you thought about dressing? Because now you dress people, dressing the people he would naked. Or have you ever thought about this?
Well, I suppose I think about that a lot, but the other way around. I think about what someone's like underneath, and how to, I mean, a job of a fashion or clothes designer is to change the way someone is seen, or to enhance it, and to adjust the proportion. So it's probably the opposite of a painter, especially someone who paints naked portraits. And especially, I just started making a few things for men, and the way I look at them is so different. I feel like I'm like literally almost like sculpting, and so you have to, I like to think of the body all the time as this kind of marvelous thing that you're drawing people to, but where their eye goes in a different place from taking off their clothes. I think that's more of a feeling than a looking.
Well, there are some of us that are psychoanalysts, so you probably see it coming, the question about also your grandfather. And I'm impressed by your father. He mentioned the way he looks, and how big eyes are, how important eyes are represented, and inside, seeing the interior, the exterior, the humanity of how impresses the beauty of people as they are, that in truth, in the true body, in the true side of it. How does the presence of your grandfather influence, or is he present? Did you talk about it? How do you feel about it? Grandfather, yeah.
His grandfather, so my great-grandfather, he never really talked about, well, he never talked about him, and so I never talked about him, except for once I asked him what he was like, and he said he was funny. So that sounded really good. I liked, because my father was funny as well, and then he, you know, he never seemed interested in analysis, but clearly he was, you know, in it from through his work. But I'm interested. I mean, I wasn't, because it wasn't like I wasn't, but because he never encouraged that. He didn't encourage any reverence of family history, and everything seemed to be about what you did yourself. So that was an incredibly vital lesson for me. And then my son, when he was at school, he came home when he was about 8 or 10 or something with a comic book about Sigmund Freud and all his theories. So I read that, and I found out everything from that book. And I found that was a good way to absorb theories and things. And it amused me as well. And I've always liked comics and learned a lot about the brevity of what's said and the jokes that are used to communicate with people and to say what you mean and sort of hide what you mean. And I use a lot of words on my... When I do a lot of knitted things, I use words, and those words I want to mean everything and nothing. So maybe that's part of that. So I kind of look for stuff that I can use. I made a perfume called Psychoanalysis. So
one thing, but do you feel, because, you know, this line anyway coming from Sigmund Freud, make him be much more interesting in painting humans than any other thing, you think, and try to go, you know, inside humans? Do you think that could add anyway any relation to the exactly the work of his grandfather?
I don't know. I suppose taking action is a way of, you know, processing stuff, and that's what he did. I mean, I'm interested in all that, but I think you can think too much and it can paralyze you. So I suppose the idea traveling down your arm and onto something is a sort of, for me, that is miraculous and can take you through difficulties in life, like when he was talking about painting the landscape when things were difficult. I was thinking about how when things seem kind of unclear, to kind of start with yourself again, as a, you know, like restart with some sort of self-portrait is a good, even if it doesn't really make any sense, it's a good place to begin again, because there's always these beginnings again. So I read a book recently that said, after all, there's only so much thinking you can do, and I thought, yeah, absolutely, you need to do stuff, and then you have other thoughts. So that's my theory.
Did he see people in the street and want to paint them? Or was he interested in the person he was painting, or was he somehow getting at something to do with himself?
I think very much, well, he didn't see people in the street, but sometimes someone would write to him and he'd think, oh, maybe there's a sitter there, maybe someone who I could work from, and sometimes there was. So some of the paintings have been started by him getting a letter, meeting someone and thinking, yeah, I'm going to work from them. But I think rather than people in the street, someone he liked working from would bring someone else. Like Lee Bowery brought some of his friends. Lee Bowery bought Big Sue, and he bought Nicola, who he worked from extensively, all of those people. And then another naked model called Angus. He bought Lee, and it kind of, we'd bring people into his life that we thought he'd like, and sometimes he did. Mostly, yeah.
Hi. I had a lot of difficulty to approach the work of Lucian Freud, and once I've seen a documentary about him, and I got a key, something like a key to go through that. And the key was that he says, if I remember well, that he spent most of his time looking at the model. This is really, I think, makes a lot of sense to me then, you know. And then, you know, when I see this film now, it's really a mind trip. It's always a mind trip, but with him more than anything else, because it's so obsessive, you know. And so this solves a lot of problems about what is art and all this kind of thing, and many people speak about that and they don't say much, you know, because you have to relate that with getting to know oneself, you know, which people don't really know what that means, you know, and I don't think psychoanalysis helps much about that. You get entangled in free association, no? What's it called? Free association of ideas, which is the opposite of meditation. It's like shaking and have a lot of confusion, and then of course something happens. So and meditation is the opposite. It's shamatha and vipassana. It's getting to a calm abiding, and then a special insight. And that is very much what it is. Does it make any sense for you?
Sounds like it makes a lot of sense to you, so that's most important.
How did he convince people to sit? And when it didn't go how he expected, what happened? And did it ever become violent?
Good question. I don't think he didn't ever convince anyone, because I don't think you can really. So people either wanted to, and some people wanted to and then lost their nerve and didn't think they could go through it, because it did take a long time and it was intense. And then he used to do this thing when it wasn't going well, is he would be working intently and then suddenly he'd make this very abrupt movement like that, or stamp, and it would be so alarming. You'd feel your blood draining from your body. It gave you a terrible shock as well. And then he sometimes would just stab his leg like that with the end of the paintbrush. And it was, you know, you just thought, oh God, it's not going well and there's nothing I can do. And I mean, I'm only speaking from my own experience, but it was like you willed with your whole body, because that's what you were offering, for it to go okay. And eventually he'd make it right. But it was quite nerve-wracking. We all used to talk about that moment. But I suppose it's good to see things go wrong and you can make them right somehow or other without throwing the thing away.
You are so disciplined in the work that, like he was, you learned something from him about that, or how do you work? How do you like it to you know, the fashion and as well? He needs a lot of discipline, I think. I'd like you to talk a little bit about you.
Yeah, it definitely does need discipline. It needs order and discipline and perseverance and tenacity. And the habit of those things make it possible to go through periods of self-doubt and kind of despair, for whatever reasons. And the continuity, I suppose, I've been doing it for a long time now, and I know that even if I don't know what I'm doing, I go to work, and I will work. Something will happen. And I've got various things I do to sort of maybe activate it a bit more. And but now that's embedded in me. I found that very difficult at first, because I was longing for this great feeling that ideas would come out of, but that almost never happens. And I like working. I love working, and I know that if I continue to work, I'll be able to do other things, which is what I'm trying to do right now. I'm working on my own sort of memoir, kind of documentary that includes a tiny bit of my family, but I'm not really interested in, I know that I can be best if I know what I'm doing, so it has to be about what I know. So if I do something that includes anything to do with him as well, or my great-grandfather, or any of my siblings, the main story is my story, and then it sounds a bit kind of, I suppose at this point, I think I've got things to say, and I spent a lot of time gauging what he would say, actually, because he was so definite. He had such a very immediate point of view that I would wait to see what he thought before I thought. And when he died, that kind of liberated me to a degree, and I thought that might happen.
Thank you for choosing this amazing film to show us, and I would like to know if you did he ever took you to the doctor? I mean, the National Gallery?
Yes, I did go a couple of times. We went out for dinner, because when I'd be sitting, I'd go there depending on when the light went. So before the light went, and then we'd start painting, and then have a break and paint, and then sometimes go for dinner. And then when we went to the National Gallery, it was about 11 o'clock at night. And it was amazing, just sort of, it was very strange being with him to look at a painting in the middle of the night and not being in the painting. And then I remember once taking him there, or going with him, and he was doing a painting of a painting in the gallery. I think it was a Corot painting. And so it felt, usually I would do the same things with my father. I would sit for him, go for dinner, sometimes go to a party or something like that. And then suddenly it was like being in a time warp. We were in the National Gallery at night, and I was leaving him there on his own, and it felt like a sort of strange film.
Did he talk about the paintings he saw in the National?
He would look at things and say, I like that, and I remember going to see a show with him, and he liked to touch the paintings, which freaked everyone out, everyone. But he had a very particular way of holding his hands, and I just remember his hand, it was like osmosis, like the fingertips almost were absorbing something. He liked to, this thing of, this is my idea, the thing traveling down the hand and into the fingers and stuff, and it was like he was doing that and taking something and kind of relating to it with his whole being. I loved that though, because it was so terrible as well. It was just great that he did these things, and you know.
Thank you. Another thing, and the movies, did he took you to the movies?
We went once to the movies. We took my younger half-brother and we went to see a film with Alec Guinness called The Lady Killers. And
Alexander McKendrick.
what?
Alexander McKendrick film, The Lady
Yeah,
Killers.
yeah. And I saw why he never went to the cinema, because he didn't want to be that distracted. And, you know, we were all so tense. It was not much fun.
Thank you.
As a sitter, did you ever feel that you had an active role in the painting?
Yes, it was very unpassive. I felt I was there for a reason. I'd been chosen. I was quite good at it, and I knew how to be good at it. And so it did feel very active. And because he talked, you know, we talked quite a lot. I knew when to talk, when not to. You know, I could see if he was painting a bit of me. And sometimes he'd just say, well, I don't know if he'd even say anything. He would just sort of, there was a moment where you knew, don't talk because he needs to really concentrate. And then he would talk again and maybe sing a song, or he loved Fats Waller, so we used to sing that sometimes. Dance around the record player in the sitting room. We had some great moments. It was always fun being with him, you know. Even if it was tense, it was always interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bella. It was a very nice moment. And see you next year.